Welcome everybody to day 2 of ESB Network's Dingle Project webinar series. My name is Fergal Egan and I have been project manager for the Dingle project since March 2020, and I will be acting as MC throughout today's webinar. The series started yesterday, Tuesday the 7th, and will continue until this Friday, the 10th of December. Tuesday's webinar provided an overview of the Dingle project and set the scene for the remainder of this week. The theme of today's webinar is all about the EV trial and the flexibility trial, and we'll hear about what those trials have involved to date, some of the observations and learnings emerging from them, and what is planned for the remainder of the trials. We encourage attendees on today's webinar to ask questions and would request that you post these in the chat box. At the end of the presentations, we'll have a questions and answers session and we'll try to address as many as possible within the time available. Each of the webinars this week will be recorded and links to them will be posted on ESB Network's website in due course. Today we have two very interesting presentations from Kieran Geeney, the ICT lead for the Dingle project, focusing on the EV trial and the flexibility trial. In between these presentations, I'll be chatting to Mike Line, who's one of the EV ambassadors for the project, and Mike will be sharing his electric motoring experiences to date. So our first speaker today is Kieran Geeney. Kieran has been the ICT lead for the Dingle project since 2019. And over that time, he has led the procurement and implementation of the key technologies and infrastructure underpinning the technical trials in Dingle. So Kieran has worked closely with all the technology companies who have provided elements of the infrastructure and solutions implemented in Dingle, and he has liaised closely with all participants on the trials to resolve any technical challenges and ensure understanding of how the technologies work along the way. Kieran is an electrical engineer with over 10 years experience in the energy sector, and prior to joining ESB Networks, he worked for EirGrid, where he held roles on the East-West Interconnector project and in power systems protection and metering. So without further ado, it's over to you, Kieran, to speak about the EV trial.
Perfect, thank you, Fergal. As Fergal said, my name is Kieran Geeney. I'm the ICT lead on ESB Network's Dingle project. Today, in the first of my presentations, I'm going to speak about what's been happening on the Dingle project in relation to electric vehicles and EV charging, and how the challenges and potential solutions may support the electrification of transport as the country strives to meet the 2030 decarbonisation targets. I'll start with a brief overview and background to the project, then I'll present the detail of the electric vehicle trial, look at the impact that EV charging has on our rural network before finishing up with some of the insights and learnings to date. The Dingle project is a 3-year project. The concept was conceived back in 2017-18 in anticipation of the electrification of heat and transport, but it was late 2018 before the project really kicked off, and the technical trials are now due to conclude in early January 2022. The climate action plans of 2019 and 2021 outlined targets of almost 1 million electric vehicles on our roads by 2030, along with approximately 600,000 homes fitted with electrified heating. And this represents a challenge for ESB Networks to ensure we can facilitate and enable this level of electrification. The Dingle project provides a location for ESB Networks to deploy and implement a range of new clean energy enabling technologies to help us better understand their impact on the electricity grid. The learnings gained will assist in the planning and development of a smart, resilient, low-carbon electricity network that can accommodate the anticipated additional demand from the electrification of heat and transport. The project was designed with 4 main objectives: increased reliability, because as people transition to lower carbon lives, their dependence on a secure and reliable electricity supply will become ever more important. Cheryl Carmody and Mary O'Mahony will discuss this objective further during their presentation on Friday of this week. Peer-to-peer services was included also to try and better understand how energy sharing services could play a role in the future, but unfortunately this objective was removed from scope during 2020 when we were unable to secure an electricity supplier partner to work with us. So the learnings have been documented and a report is available up on ESB Network's website. The Active Energy Citizen focuses on the people and the community aspects of the project, and among other things, it's exploring how individuals and citizens can be empowered to start along their low-carbon energy transformation journey, and Claire McGilligan, the Community Engagement Lead on the project, will discuss this in greater detail tomorrow during her presentation. And finally, customer flexibility looks at how customers and their technologies can play a role in the electricity system by providing energy services from installed energy storage or by moving demand away from one time to another. The technical aspects of the EV trial fall under this objective, while some of the more behavioural aspects of the EV trial could fall under the Active Energy Citizen objective. So the electric vehicle trial, really there were three elements to getting this up and running. The first was to secure a lease on 17 electric vehicles for a 12-month period. Then we needed to select 10 people to join our existing 5 project ambassadors in becoming EV champions, and we needed to purchase and install EV chargers at each of their homes. When going to the market to secure a lease on 17 EVs, we had a number of requirements, one of which was that 5 of the 17 had to be capable of supporting vehicle-to-grid to enable us to test and evaluate this concept and understand its impact on the electricity grid. Other requirements that were provided: vehicles had to have a range of 300 kilometers or more, and that 2 would have to be available on a car sharing basis. Hyundai Ireland, along with Europcar, were successful and have provided the vehicles on the project with support from Adams of Tralee, the local Hyundai dealer. In terms of selecting the people to be involved, expressions of interest were sought through local press and media and at local events on the peninsula in times before COVID. There were over 350 applicants, and based on several factors, that number was whittled down to the successful 10. The 10 cars were distributed to members of the community on the car sharing plans for the 2 designated EVs had to be changed due to COVID-19, and instead were distributed to members of the community then on a more managed basis, where a number of additional people got to experience electrified motoring for around 1 month or 6 weeks at a time. Wallbox were chosen as the provider of the electric vehicle chargers due to the availability of their residential scale single-phase vehicle-to-grid charger, while also being able to provide the regular smart chargers that could be controlled remotely. The Wallbox Pulsar Plus charger was provided to all participants initially, and then when the vehicle-to-grid units became available in early October, the existing Pulsar Plus units were replaced for those participants who had the Nissan Leafs. So why was all of this done? We needed to install the EV chargers and monitoring to be able to have real charging happening in order for ESB networks to better understand the impact that it would have on the local electricity grid. The different lifestyles and driving needs across all the participants gives us a great understanding of the differing energy requirements that those who drive 1,500 kilometers a week have in comparison to those maybe who drive 300 to 400 kilometers per week. The trial also provided many across the Dingle Peninsula with the experience of driving an electric car that they may not otherwise have had. It has enabled the testing of smart solutions and technologies to try and minimise the impact that charging has on the grid, and we've demonstrated that demand reduction and vehicle-to-grid energy services can be implemented successfully and may play a role in the operation of the low-carbon electricity grid of the future. When the chargers were first installed in January 2021, a number of the other software platforms were not yet in place, so the units were controlled by the participants via the Wallbox mobile app. Then, as time went on and Greencom Networks put in place the software platform to monitor and control all the technologies in their homes, the drivers for the different charger types were developed. A driver was developed for the Pulsar Plus chargers to communicate with the Greencom Networks gateway via the Open Charge Point protocol. A separate driver was developed later for the Quasar vehicle-to-grid charger to communicate with the Greencom Networks gateway device via Modbus TCP. These integrations allowed the centralized Greencom Network system to monitor the data from the chargers and also to be able to control the charging. Various tests on the control are ongoing and include the scheduling of charging based on time to avoid the peak times of the day. Other tests have explored moving charging from one time of day to another, with pricing information as the driver. And the last suite of tests have demonstrated the capability to temporarily suspend charging for short periods of time on receipt of a centralized command. An example of where this type of scenario could be used is in cases where the electricity has a shortage of generation following some sort of generator or interconnector tripping. The graphs on screen on the right-hand side step through one of these manually triggered demand response tests. It's worth noting that this test was conducted at an ideal time when EV charging was underway and the heat pump in this particular property was consuming energy. This is shown in the bottom right graph, with the dark navy colour representing the power consumption of the EV charger and the orange that of the heat pump. In this example, a command was sent at 16:04 to the property, and by 16:05, the EV charger and heat pump had reduced their consumption, In total, 7 to 8 kilowatts of controllable demand was suspended for a 10-minute period. At the same time, the installed battery storage system also provided 2.5 kilowatts into the home, and the excess was sent to the grid, and the resultant power reduction observed at a transformer level was approximately 10 kilowatts, that's shown on the top right chart. On this chart, the light blue represents the overall load on the transformer, while the dark navy represents the power consumption of our test property. At 1614, the demand response instruction expired, and by 1615, the heat pump had returned to its previous state and EV charging had also recommenced. The test resulted in a power reduction of almost 30% of the transformer rating during that 10-minute period. And while this test was conducted at just one location, it demonstrates the potential and capability for this type of control. Further tests are scheduled that will involve up to 15 properties, all aggregated together and responding at the same time. The Dingle project has seen the first 5 domestic-scale vehicle-to-grid or V2G chargers deployed and tested in Ireland. Vehicle-to-grid is where energy can be discharged from the electric vehicle back into the home, with any surplus energy not used in the home sent back into the electricity grid. The Quasar units installed from Wallbox have shown they can discharge at approximately 5.5 kilowatts from the connected Nissan Leaf electric vehicle, and with a fully charged EV battery, it could sustain that for 10 hours or more. It's highly unlikely it would be used in this manner, but it represents huge capability, and ESB networks are testing this to understand how it would impact the electricity grid, and also how energy services like this could be utilised in the future. Another point worth noting is that while there are V2G chargers available today, many are not commercially available or mass market ready, and the unit price really reflects that. Some V2G units, for example, are multiple times the price of a standard smart charger. This slide looks at the first vehicle-to-grid test that was performed back in early October of this year. The test involved discharging energy from the connected Nissan Leaf electric vehicle for around 35 to 37 minutes, and then the vehicle was recharged again. It's also worth pointing out that the Wallbox Quasar charger only charges the electric vehicle up as far as 97%. According to Wallbox, it's essential that the charger stops charging at 97% to enable the effective discharging of the battery. Charging above 97% impedes the discharging process. From midnight up until around 11:20 in the morning, there was minimal power usage in the property, somewhere in the region of 250 watts, and you can see that with the little navy bars on the chart on the right-hand side. At 11:22, a command was issued to the charger to discharge at 25 amps, and we observed roughly around 5.4 kilowatts being discharged from the charger into the home. Subtracting the approximate 250 watts needed within the home, we can see a surplus power of approximately 5.2 kilowatts exported out to the grid in the lighter blue color shown below the line. At 11:59, the discharge event was stopped and the charger was instructed to recharge the vehicle again so it was fully recharged for the user. This test demonstrated the huge capability for this type of technology as another form of energy storage. When compared with the battery energy storage systems deployed to the Dingle project ambassador homes, the vehicle-to-grid charger can output double the amount of power and could sustain that output for 10 times as long, provided the EV battery was fully charged. But as I mentioned earlier, these units are very cost prohibitive at present. Now to look at the impact on the electricity network and some examples. In this particular example, we're looking at data from a monitor installed on the low voltage side of a 15 kVA transformer. For reference, approximately 40% of our customers are connected to 15 kVA transformers. In this particular example, there are 6 connected customers, including one of our Dingle ambassadors. We can see the large increases in power flow through the transformer during the times between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. when a 3-hour charge was being completed. This happened to coincide with one of the traditional peaks in energy usage on the grid, and in the time between 5 and 6 p.m, highlighted in the grey background, you can see how there was a short-term overload measured on the transformer above the red line. Later on then we can see where charging started again around midnight and lasted for approximately 8 hours until 8:30 in the morning. Across the trial, this is more common as many people who are participating are on day-night tariffs and are maximising the savings they're getting by charging during that window. Again, the window is highlighted here in grey. In this case, we see that the loading on the transformer is high, but remains just below the transformer rating, but it's clear that extended overloading would present an issue here if additional customers on this particular transformer were to install EV chargers. In the next example, we look at a 33 kVA transformer where we have 12 customers connected, and we also have another one of our Dingle project ambassadors. Here we can see that because of the additional customers, it's harder to pick out events like EV charging as it gets masked by the other loads in the neighbouring properties. That said, we can still see there is an increase in demand for around 3.5 hours during the nighttime period. And in this case, the duration of the charge was shorter, and it didn't last as long into the night. We can see that during the 24-hour period, there's some way to go before this transformer will be overloaded, and it's likely capable of supporting a small number of additional charges before any issues would arise. This also shows that shorter, more frequent charges may be better accommodated by the electricity network, and they also provide more flexibility in terms of when charging could be completed during that nighttime period. Now I'm going to go through some of the insights and learnings to date. The EV trial has been ongoing since February 2021 and has seen 17 vehicles deployed on the peninsula. Almost 300,000 kilometres have been driven to date, with almost 48 megawatt hours of charging completed across more than 1,600 charging sessions done at the participants' homes. We know from the data and with feedback from the participants that electric vehicles with the range available today can work for rural communities and users. We have seen a growing confidence throughout the trial, and some of my next slides will demonstrate this. We've seen people drive up to 786 kilometres in a single day, almost 2,000 kilometres in a single week, and up to 4,500 kilometres in a single month. And while the impact of EV charging on the network is significant, demand reduction schemes and vehicle-to-grid capability demonstrate the huge potential there is for flexibility or energy services to be able to help manage it. On this slide, we can see the growing number of kilometres that the participants have driven each week, with the peak being 11,632 kilometres on week 47, which was between the 15th and 21st of November. This demonstrates that along with the relaxation of COVID-19 restrictions at various points throughout the year, confidence is growing among our EV champions in making longer journeys with their vehicles. The map on the right, courtesy of Rentalmatics, gives a flavour of where the EVs have gone across the length and breadth of the country and even further afield. Focusing now on the EV charging, the chart on the top right shows the hours of day when, on average, the most amount of EVs are charging concurrently on our project. From this, we can see that 5 to 6 EVs, which makes up around 35 to 40% of the EVs we have on our project, are generally charging between 2 and 5 a.m. This is not unexpected, as the majority of our EV champions have a night rate meter and predominantly charge during that low price period. That said, there are still a few who need to charge or prefer to charge at other times of the day, and generally speaking, there's always one EV charging at any given time. It shows that some people aren't totally obsessed by the electricity price when choosing when to charge their EV, and with current energy prices, charging during the day still works out cheaper than using your petrol or diesel equivalent. The chart on the bottom right is a histogram, and each bar represents an amount of energy typically consumed during charging. What this tells us is that across the project, people have different charging behaviours that range from very small, short charges all the way to large, longer, maybe even full charges, and is dependent on how many kilometres each does per day or per week. Another interesting observation from our data is in relation to the use of the public chargers in Dingle, Tralee and Killarney by our EV fleet. This data is based on geofencing, and we don't know the length or amount of charging completed, but rather the number of times that the vehicles visited these chargers. It's interesting to see that the Dingle charger, and it may be coincidence, but its use has increased significantly in November, following an upgrade of the unit from 22 kilowatts to the standard 50 kilowatt in late October. What we don't know is if its use is due to necessity as a result of range anxiety or merely just testing out the new charging unit. Speaking then about range anxiety, one of the things that became evident early on in the trial was that once people became familiar with their EV and its range, that range anxiety soon became less of an issue. We can see that within 3 weeks or so, some users were completing in excess of 500 kilometres in a single day. Instead, What we have found in terms of feedback from our EV champions is that charger anxiety is becoming more of an issue. If you were to drive 300 kilometers plus and plan to stop and charge, that charger is working when you get there. As many will have seen recently, one of our EV ambassadors undertook the trip from Dingle to COP26 in Glasgow and wrote a blog about their experience. And many of the issues they encountered along their trip was in relation to the chargers and not so much the range of the vehicle. And now onto my last slide. And it looks at the suitability of EVs commonly available in the market today. There's lots of dots and colours on this slide, but taking the number of kilometres driven each day, by each individual vehicle, we have over 5,100 data points plotted on screen. From this large data set, we can see that for 75% of these so-called vehicle days, the distance travelled was less than 85 kilometres. And for 95% of these vehicle days, the distance travelled on a single day was less than 191 kilometres. In fact, only 1% of vehicle days has the vehicle travelled in excess of 374 kilometres, and that reduces to less than 0.5% of people travelling more than 410 kilometres in any single day. Now, given that many of the EVs available in the market today quote a range of around 400 kilometres or more, the data we have here would suggest that this kind of range is more than adequate for the majority of people, even in rural communities where it may be 50 or 60 kilometres to the nearest urban centres. In the case of Dingle, that might be to Killarney or Tralee, and that people need not wait for vehicles to come along with a longer range. We've seen firsthand on this project, and Mike may speak about it next, that savings that can be gained by driving electric in comparison with diesel or petrol vehicles at present are quite substantial. Many of our EV champions were getting 1,000 kilometres for somewhere in the region of less than €20 compared with maybe 70, 80 or 90 euros that it may have cost them in terms of diesel or petrol depending on the fuel prices at the time. In fact, one of our project ambassadors has gone on and changed their second diesel family car on the back of the savings that they were seeing. So maybe when it's next time to change your vehicle, you might consider electric also. Thank you. I'll pass back to Fergal.
Thank you, Kieran, for sharing so much information on what the EV trial is about and the observations, learnings and capabilities of the technologies. It's really great. And it's great to see that what we in ESB Networks thought was going to be a purely technical trial, helping to inform us of the potential impact of EV charging on the electricity network. But that's also provided such rich insights around the fit of electric vehicles on the market today for people living in rural communities. And it's to understand more about this that I'm delighted to introduce you all to Mike Lyne, one of the Dingle Project's EV ambassadors. On a day-to-day basis, Mike is a very busy man, combining a variety of jobs from that of a fisherman to working in the local hospitality sector. And Mike has also a very active family life, shuttling his children to sporting events and training, so much so that his electric vehicle has really been put through its paces every day. Mike, you're very welcome to today's webinar, and I'm guessing that people connected in today, whether they have an EV, whether they're thinking about an EV, or whether they think an EV might never be a fit for them, would be very interested to hear about your own experiences. So Mike, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Fergal.
And I suppose just to get us started, you might tell us a little bit about your day-to-day life and really how important the car is for you and your family living in a rural community.
Well, anything we do and anywhere we go, we're a minimum of 10 miles from the shop. Even Casper football pitch is 10 miles away, Camp Soccer Club. Anything we have to do or go to, minimum 10, 15 kilometres.
So it's critical that you have access to a car. You don't have a public transport network that you can fall back on.
No, there's no public transport network. There's one bus that leaves Clahan on a Friday, and that's it at 9 a.m. So that's the only chance you have to go to Tralee if you don't have a car.
Very good, very good. And tell us, beyond the obvious of getting an electric vehicle to use for a year, why did you want to be involved in the ESB Networks Dingle project?
I was just curious and I was skeptical at the same time about the EVs. And I was just thinking, would they have the range? Would the grid collapse with all these EVs hooked up? And, different things like that. Just curiosity more than anything. And I wanted to reduce my own carbon footprint as well, with driving two diesels at the moment.
Very good, very good. And I suppose maybe for those that are listening in today or watching in today that haven't yet experienced driving an electric vehicle, can you tell us a little bit about how different the whole experience of driving an EV is to maybe driving a petrol or a diesel?
Well, you just sit in the morning and it automatically is warmed up for you if you want and everything. You can set the settings to that. And then you just head off, and with the automatic gearbox, it makes life very easy. And then you have the comfort, and you have a good sound system, and you have instant power. And no matter where you're going, you just know you don't have to worry, just drive on.
Very good, very good. And you've had the EV for 10 months or so now and been driving it fairly hard. And beyond the fact of the model that you have not having a tow bar on the back, are there any downsides that you see to people having an EV?
The downsides probably the lack of charge points, especially in even the Dingle Peninsula. Even though we're fine, like us, we can go home, but for people coming in and we rely on tourism so much, there's only 2 charge points in the Dingle Peninsula, as far as I know, both in Dingle town, and then of course we have ones in our own houses. I think there's definitely room for more of those, and the chargers as well would need to be put in high visibility places. You know, there's one in Tralee there, which kind of in a corner. There's in different places where, you know, maybe a lady on her own might be very slow to go at night and charge up. You know, things like that are little observations I have made.
Very good. And tell us, just in that whole area of range anxiety, like, have you ever been cut short or worried about not having enough battery power to get you someplace?
No, I've never been worried. One time I went down to Cork and came back. I had about 2% left, but I knew I had enough to come home. Another time I went to Galway, and on the way down, I figured I'd charge in Abbeyfield, and I charged in Abbeyfield, but the 22 kilowatt one was disappointing because I only got like 4%, and I was hoping to take me home, but then I got another charge in Tralee, and that brought me home. But other than that, and now they have improved that, they're getting rid of the 22 kilowatt ones, and they're within the 50 in most places, which will be a big improvement for charging for anybody that's, you know, the 22 kilowatt would be fine in the city because all you need is a couple of percent to take you home. But if you're living back in Clahan, Brandon area, and you're up in Limerick, you need something to take you at least 100, 150 kilometres.
Very good. And the range on the Leaf that you have a Nissan Leaf, that's 350 kilometres or so?
360, yeah.
Yeah.
Up and down to Cork, one charge for a fiver.
Very, very good. Very good.
Now, at the moment, there's been a reduction in the range. I think, I know, is it the weather or is it just battery life? I'm not sure. We'll learn more from that in the next few months when we'll see how the weather will get colder.
Exactly, and it's probably to do with the deterioration in the weather that the range has come down slightly. But as you say, you can watch it for the next 2 months and let people know what that is. And tell us, Mike, in terms of, like, for people who don't know, the Connor Pass is a lovely part of the Dingle Peninsula. Have you any EV experience or EV motoring experience from driving up or driving down that?
Well, you can go up the Connor Pass for 6%, and you can come back down for about 2%. So you're actually recharging, come back down. So it's about 4.5%, 5% to do Connor Pass back and forth to Dingle. Me and my wife could go to work. If that's all we were doing with the car, we could go to work the whole week, the two of us, and the car could be charged on the Friday evening then for the following week.
So it's very efficient that way in terms of driving around the peninsula for you. That's great to hear. And you mentioned earlier on about charging, and you know, you have an EV charger at home, a charge point at home in the house. And how have you found charging the EV at home? Like you got your first EV charger back in January of this year. Like, was it easy, or have you any experience that you want to share around EV charging?
It was quite easy. You just set up the app basically for what time suits, and you just plug in your thing, and then it automatically kicks in. Now, with the new EV to grid charger, the new one, there's been a little more problems with that because they have been doing different tests and stuff, and the times on that, when I would plug in, it would automatically go charging, whereas I would prefer if it waited until 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah. And I think, Mike, that was part of the tests that we were doing on the vehicle to grid and things like that. But normally, if you set up the schedule, or even in terms of the optimization system that we've in place, it will actually charge it at the off-peak time. But that's good, very good. So overall, the EV charging has been very efficient at home.
They've been very efficient at home, yeah.
And in terms of, like, before you got an EV, and even when you got the EV the first time, were you a bit concerned about using the public charging network, or have you had to use the public charging network to date?
I use it quite a bit. I kind of plan my journey if I'm going a long journey, and you know, you figure out, okay, we'll go stop in Obama Plaza for breakfast, and we'll charge it, and then we have enough to take us to Dublin. Then coming back, you do something similar, and if you can plan your day pretty easy, it should be no problem. I've never had a problem. The only place was Galway. I found it hard to find chargers in Galway the time I went to Galway, and I used my friend's house. So it's always an option. You can plug in with just a regular wire into the regular socket, and you will still get a good bit of charge for, if you're plugged in for 7-8 hours, you get about 50-55%.
Very good. So your advice to people would be don't be afraid of having to use the public charging infrastructure.
Oh, no, don't be afraid of it. No, it's very simple. You just scan your card, it's like just pressing play on any kind of a machine, and that's it, job done.
Great. And tell us, Mike, is there much interest around the community in terms of electric vehicles? Like, is your EV very obvious? Are people asking you lots of questions?
Yeah, a lot of people have asked me a lot of questions, especially in the first probably 3-4 months I had it, because a lot of people weren't out and about that much. And when they were, it'd be usually when I'd be parked close to the beach, I'd go for my walk, people would come over and they were curious, like the range and how much it do. A lot of farmers were curious, could I put the hitch on it? A lot of different people were curious about different things.
And has anybody actually made a purchase that you know of, or how keen are people to actually take a step along that way?
Well, 2 guys I were talking to, whether they had it in their mind already now, I won't take credit for it, but both have bought EVs since I was chatting to them. So whether I made their minds up or whether they had their minds made up or not, but I think talking to them, I probably convinced them a bit, and I try to tell them get, one with a higher range if they can, and the higher kilowatts because you have more power and more range. One guy, he went for the smaller range, and I think he's sorry now, but that's life. We learn from our mistakes. Exactly.
And have you given anybody a spin in it, or?
Oh yeah, I've given a lot of people a spin, especially friends and family, and they just sit in, and I don't tell them about the power, and then when I put the power of the shoe down, they just are knocked back in their seat. It's almost like an airplane taking off. They're amazed that there is, because they were expecting it to be like sluggish and slow. So that's the big surprise, like the instant acceleration, the torque is there immediately as soon as you.
Yeah.
It's like pressing play in a music machine. You just have music instantly like that, you have power instantly. No changing gears.
Very good. And like, do you think are people across the community in Dingle, are they really likely to buy EVs over the coming years, or is this considered, like, are people interested now just because the trial is ongoing, do you think?
No, I'd say people are concerned in general about the environment, and they probably will. But I'd say the big downfall at the moment will be the price. Once the prices come down, it will make a big difference. Because like if you buy just a regular Kona now, I just did a check this morning, they're like 24,000 something. Whereas if you buy an electric Kona, you're talking 37,000. So there's 13,000 of a difference, which is a lot. So once the prices come down, just like TVs or anything new that comes out in the market is usually quite expensive. And then when it drops down, then you get more people buying into it. I mean, if you look back 15 years ago, not everybody had flat screen TV. Now everybody has them in every room. So that's just the example I'm using. So I think we will in 8-10 years' time see a lot more electric vehicles on our roads.
Great.
Even in West Kerry.
Very good. And what advice would you give to somebody if they were really determined to buy an EV? Have you any guidance for them?
I would say just go for it and give me a call, and I'll give you any advice you want to know. You'll be able to get my number from Kieran or Petrol or anybody or Claire. And, I would say, and go for it, and you have nothing to lose. The battery life, I would make sure, get a good warranty for battery life, because now they're improving with that all the time. And things like that. Like in the beginning, it was 5 years, 60,000 kilometers. Now I have 30,000 kilometers done already. So if I do 30 next year, my warranty is null and void. So, you have to check out all those different things, because the battery is the big issue. And we'll have to just go from there.
Yeah. And do you see, like, have you seen, in addition to the 17 EVs that were provided as part of the project in Dingle, are there other people? Are you seeing many others on the road? I know you mentioned 1 or 2 people that are buying them, but are you seeing a gradual increase in them around the community?
I've seen quite a few during the summer, especially in Dingle town. There were, there was quite a few Teslas, a few Nissan Leafs, quite a few, coming around. Not a lot yet, but you can still see the difference, because now you know yourself from the fact that you're driving a certain car, you will notice, is there more of them on the road? Is there more of them in the car park you're parking in? Is there more of them in different places?
Yeah, yeah. And now the really hard question for you, Mike. So our trial is going to finish at the end of January, and the EVs will be going back. Will you be really sad at that stage, or what's going to happen?
I think you should extend it out for another 6 months at least. So I am out all the little niggly things you have going at the moment, the chargers and everything, and extend it out. And I'd be kind of sad to lose it. Yeah, my wife would do, because she drives it quite a bit as well. But you never know. We might get it for a good deal, and we work on things from there.
Yeah. And even if that was possible, do you think over the coming 3, 5, 10 years that yourself and the family will invest in an EV?
I'd say definitely in the next 5 years. We'll invest. One of the cars will definitely be, especially when my son and my daughters now are driving, and they're more concerned and everything about the environment. And they would love to have been able to drive this car, but because of insurance purposes, they couldn't. And I'd say definitely within the next 3 to 5 years, definitely when they'll be changing up the next time I look at it.
Very good, very good. And in terms of their view on the EV, like, do they think it's cool to be seen in an EV?
That they have, because people are asking them questions as well. How did you get that? You're so lucky to have that car. You're saving the planet and all this. It's a different view from teenagers.
Very good, very good. It's good to get that different perception across a family as well. But listen, Mike, Thanks so much for chatting to us today about your experience to date on the EV trial, and continued safe driving for the remainder of the trial and beyond. And you're going to stay with us now for the next presentation by Kieran on flexibility, and you can join in then in the Q&A at the end of the session. So once again, Mike, many, many thanks, and we really appreciate you getting involved in the project.
Yeah. One final thing I would like to say, I would have loved if I could have put my battery charge into my house last night when I had no power. So we'll have to work on that, Kieran, won't we?
Yeah, and actually, I suppose one of the challenges there is just for safety reasons, Mike, at the moment. Yeah. If the power is down on the network, we can't allow the power to come from any generation or, for example, your vehicle to grid power supply back into the home in case some of it would feed back onto the network and somebody was trying to reconnect the lines. And
I understand that. Yeah, I understand that. But that could be a thing to be worked out for the future, especially in rural parts of Ireland where we do lose the power quite a bit.
Exactly. In the future, these solutions will probably emerge, but they're just not there yet at the moment anyway. So listen, Mike, thanks once again. So I suppose delighted now to call on Kieran again to take us through his second presentation on the day, and he's going to speak about the flexibility trial, the underpinning ICT infrastructure behind that, the observations and learnings and everything associated with that. So over to you again now, Kieran. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Fergal. As Fergal said, I'm going to go through on the second of my presentations now, all the elements of our customer flexibility objective. For the benefit of anyone who missed the earlier presentation or has dialed in a bit later, I'll start with a quick overview and background to the project again. I'll discuss the topic of customer flexibility, outline the technology and the ICT elements that were required, before moving on then to describe the flexibility use cases, the demand response schemes that we were testing and how they align with the ENA active power products and those adopted by ESB Networks, National Networks Local Connections Programme. I'll round out the presentation then with an overview of the tests completed to date and some of the insights and learnings. So as I mentioned earlier, the project's a 3-year project. The concept conceived back in 2017-18, anticipation of the electrification of heat and transport, but it was late 2018 before the project really kicked off, and the technical trials are due to conclude in mid-January 2022. The climate action plans of 2019 and 2021 outlined targets of almost 1 million electric vehicles on the roads by 2030, along with approximately 600,000 homes fitted with electrified heating. And this represents a challenge for ESB Networks to ensure that we are able to facilitate and enable this level of electrification. The Dingle project provides a location for ESB Networks to deploy and implement a range of new clean energy enabling technologies to help us better understand their impact on the electricity grid. The learnings gained will assist in the planning and development of a smart, resilient, low-carbon electricity network that will be able to accommodate the anticipated additional demand from the electrification of heat and transport. The project was designed with 4 main objectives: increased reliability, topical at the moment, because as people transition to lower carbon lives, their dependence on a secure and reliable supply will become ever more important. Peer-to-peer services, as I mentioned earlier, was included to try and understand how energy sharing services could play a role in the future, but the objective was removed from scope during 2020 when we were unable to get an electricity supplier partner to work with us, so the learnings are documented and a report is available on ESB Networks' website. The Active Energy Citizen focuses on the individuals and citizens and how they can be empowered to start along their low carbon transformation journey. And Claire McGilligan, the customer engagement lead, will speak more about that during her presentation tomorrow. Finally, the customer flexibility, which is the topic of this presentation, looks at how customers and their technologies can play a role in the electricity system by providing energy services from installed energy storage or by moving demand away from one time to another. As briefly mentioned earlier, customer flexibility is all about reducing demand on the network by using the customer's ability to change their energy usage, by reducing their consumption or using energy storage or other forms of generation where it's available. The Dingle project deployed several technologies across 35 different properties, including battery energy storage systems, solar PV, air source heat pumps, and electric vehicles with either a smart electric vehicle charger or a bi-directional vehicle to grid charger. The EV chargers, heat pumps, and energy storage systems are being controlled remotely as part of our customer flexibility tests, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a second. So for the Dingle project, the customer flexibility objective had a few main aims. Firstly, we wanted to procure and install clean energy enabling technologies so that we could get real data from our tests. It must be noted that ESB Networks do not typically operate any equipment behind the customer meter, but is doing so as part of this trial in order to better understand the capabilities of these technologies and what form of energy services they can provide. And while we know in theory that these technologies can be controlled to provide different forms of energy service to the grid, we wanted to understand the reality of making such things possible and assess the challenges and reliability of this type of control. One of the outcomes of this objective will be the documentation of our learnings and will include technical elements regarding the impact of these technologies and energy services on the grid, but also the customer behavioural element, which will also outline how the customer interaction with these technologies directly influences the magnitude and availability of the response that you get. These learnings will be key for ESB Networks to determine if smart solutions can really offer a non-wires alternative to traditional network reinforcement methods like larger transformers, reconducting portions of the network, and splitting of low voltage groups. One element that's not covered by the Dingle project is how these services would be procured or through what entities, but these are areas which ESB Networks National Networks Local Connections Programme will explore further. In order for us to understand what flexibility or energy services could give us, we need to understand how the network is planned, designed, and built today. At present, ESB Networks plan the network to be able to cater for the most heavily loaded 30-minute period of the year, and by doing so, it means that there is some headroom or spare capacity at all other times of the year. Now, if we could effectively reduce the demand at these times when the network is most heavily loaded or constrained, that would mean we could enable or accommodate the connection of additional demand from e-heat or e-transport and still satisfy our customers' requirements. Also, using the optimization capabilities of the technology solution that we have deployed to each home, it should mean that we have reduced loadings during peak times, and that could also potentially allow for traditional network reinforcements to be deferred for a period of time. Further tests will also demonstrate that participating homes can be commanded to reduce their discretionary or uncontrollable load to a minimum, while also leveraging installed energy storage where it is available. Energy services like this may become increasingly important over the coming years when there are significant system events like generator trippings or interconnector trippings. The technology to enable the visualization, control, and monitoring of all of our installed clean energy enabling technologies has been provided by a company called Greencom Networks. They have a suite of cloud-based tools such as their energy information brokerage platform that enables the control and monitoring and remote management that we need for all our trials. The Greencom platform also provides the participating customers with a web and mobile app interface to view their real-time and historical energy usage. For our ambassadors, they can see what their EV charger, heat pump, battery and solar systems are doing, along with the rest of their household consumption, and can provide other metrics such as energy self-consumption and grid independence. Now, taking our 5 project ambassadors, they have received the full suite of technology, including an EV and a Wallbox Smart EV charger, an energy monitoring sensor on their incoming energy supply from their energy meter, a Mitsubishi air source heat pump, and a Sonnen hybrid battery energy storage system into which their solar PV array was connected. A small gateway device from Greencom Networks was also installed in each of these homes. Specific drivers and integrations for each technology enable data to be collected from each of the devices and also facilitates the control of the chargers, battery systems, and heat pumps. The gateways also manage and optimize the energy flows between these devices in the economic interest of the customer, and this is something I'll delve into further in a few moments. All of the collected data gets sent back to a centralized data repository that's hosted by Greencom Networks, where it can also then feed the mobile app for the participating customers and also provide ESB Networks with visualizations and data analytics options. Greencom have also a number of other cloud-based tools to help manage the software on the gateway devices, along with interfaces and APIs for uploading pricing profiles and issuing demand response commands that we will use as part of our flexibility trials. This slide now shows a recorded animation of an ambassador home, and when it collects all that data, you will see that the battery energy storage system is outputting just over 1 kilowatt, plus another 215 watts from the solar PV, and combining that with 1.2 kilowatts coming in from the grid, it serves the 2.5 kilowatts of demand from the heat pump and the rest of the household appliances. There have been several learnings from this project, but one of the key ones relates to the significant challenge around communications, both in terms of availability and reliability. In a rural community like Dingle, we have had locations where there was no availability of wired broadband, so we had to resort to mobile broadband solutions, and in some cases that even wasn't possible. Also, during the past 12 months, there's been several outages with broadband and internet suppliers and the mobile network operators, some of which lasted 24 to 48 hours. Now, utilising the customer's Wi-Fi has also been challenging, and we have had cases where passwords or routers were changed and site visits were needed to restore connectivity to some of the sensors or devices. Another issue which has cropped up a few times relates to software and firmware updates on some of the installed technologies, such as the energy sensors, chargers, and battery systems. On a few occasions, these updates have broken the integrations with the Greencom system in the home, resulting in a loss of monitoring or control of these particular units. Working with over 30 participating households, we've also experienced some challenges around user behavior, and we've had to work closely with all the participants to try and minimize issues such as routers and gateways being powered off at night. Those participants also with EV chargers have had an option that they could override the optimal EV charging schedule that the Greencom system derives. And we've seen a number of cases where user anxiety around charging has resulted in the optimization being left disabled for extended periods and has limited maybe some of the testing which we were doing, which I'll speak about in a second. The forms of demand response being trialed in this project can be described as either time-based, price-based, or manually triggered or activated. The time-based tests look to move electrical demand away from predefined times of day, and if this can be managed appropriately at scale, when the grid is most under pressure, then it could potentially allow additional electrical demand to be accommodated without an immediate need for physical network upgrades. This is achieved in practice by delivering a pricing profile to each Greencom gateway that indicates high and low price periods. With the economic optimization that runs on the gateway, they then control the respective devices like the EV charger, heat pump, and battery systems in line with that. The pure price-based approach looks to understand what impact dynamic pricing or potential future tariffs may have on the electricity network, and if the deployed smart controllers can be leveraged to help manage peak network loadings in a more dynamic and agile way. It'll also help ESB networks understand if controls such as this will cause new and different challenges on the electricity network, when multiple customers would then be potentially all doing the same things at the same time. On our project, we actually leveraged the day-ahead pricing from the Octopus Energy Agile tariff from the UK as our dynamic pricing input, and after some adjustments, we can feed it into each of the Greencom gateways. They in turn then recalculate the optimal running or operation of the devices in each of their homes and control them to follow that schedule over the following 24 to 36 hours. The purpose of the short duration manual or triggered demand response test is to demonstrate that energy consumption from EV charging or heat pumps can be paused or suspended for short periods, and where available, additional support can be provided to the grid from domestic batteries or vehicle to grid. Several successful tests have been conducted to date demonstrating this capability, which could be used following a large system event when the grid is in need of additional generation or a reduction in grid demand, and we'll see the results of some of these tests in a few slides. The flexibility use cases we've defined align quite closely to the ENA, or Energy Networks Association's active power flexibility products, which were developed in the Open Networks project in the UK. They are the flexibility products also adopted by ESB Networks' National Networks Local Connections Programme. For the Dingle project, our time-scheduled demand response use case aligns well to the sustain product. The tariff is a day-night tariff with additional high price periods around the morning and evening peaks and a super low period during the middle of the night. The pricing is defined and the tests are run for several days or weeks at a time. The profile can then be changed if needed before the next running of the tests, and some of the sample profiles are shown in the plots on the top left. For the secure product, it aligns to our price-driven demand response use case. You can see that there is almost a different price for each hour of the day, and generally speaking, it's more expensive during the peak times or when wholesale market prices are higher. In our tests, we're using pricing information to influence the response of the gateways and sites, but almost any data feed could be integrated, such as forecasted renewables, carbon intensity, or even network congestion. For the dynamic service, it aligns quite closely with our manual demand response use case. The graphic shows how discretionary demand can be reduced when instructed for the requested time period. As well as reducing discretionary demand, such as from EV charging and heat pump load, our tests also supplement that response further using energy storage where it's available from the domestic batteries or vehicle to grid capability. And we'll see that now in our results. In the next slides, we'll discuss a number of results from a sample of tests that we have completed. As I mentioned, the Greencom Networks gateway and platform operates an economic optimization for the benefit of the customer. And by altering that pricing information for each gateway, we can influence the control of the respective clean energy enabling technologies in the home. For the time scheduled tests, a pricing profile was defined at the start and not altered during the tests. The pricing profile or tariff supplied to each gateway is based on a fictitious day and night tariff with additional periods during the morning and evening peaks and a low period during the night. The graph on the right shows the price per hour in the dark navy color. The lighter blue color represents the combined energy usage across all 15 sites where we have controllable equipment. That is our 5 ambassador sites and our other 10 EV champions or participants. We can clearly see that the periods of highest energy consumption, most typically associated with EV charging and heat pump water heating, aligns with the lowest price periods. On this slide, this is an example of one of our manual demand response tests. The trend on screen shows a 24-hour period from 10 a.m. on the 2nd of December until 10 a.m. on the 3rd of December. You can clearly see the 15-minute window when we executed our test. I'll zoom in and take a closer look at the timing and response that we got during the test. In this case, the instruction or command was issued to our 5 vehicle to grid sites only. We have full control over what sites the command gets sent to and for how long we want the demand response event to last. The command was sent at 22:05 on the 2nd of December with a 15-minute duration. You can see that there was roughly 21 to 22 kilowatts of load across the 5 properties at the time of the test. There was EV charging underway at 3 of the 5 locations, and you can see the power usage in purple, orange, and navy. Each charger was charging at approximately 5 kilowatts. By 22:06, a number of sites had started to respond. Those 3 sites which were charging, stopped charging and started to discharge. Another site which had an EV connected but wasn't charging, it also started to discharge. The 5th site offered no response as there was either no EV there or if it wasn't connected at the time. By 22:10, the discharge from each of the vehicle to grid chargers had ramped up to its max output, with each of the 4 participating sites exporting approximately 5.5 kilowatts, with the combined net export to the grid of around 20 kilowatts. Between 22:10 and 22:20, we can see the combined export vary as the household consumption varies at one site, that represented in the red color. At 22:20, the demand response event finishes, and by 2021, we can see that the charging resumes again at the 3 sites which were initially charging. Overall, approximately 15 kilowatts of charging load was suspended during this test, and between 18 to 20 kilowatts was discharged and exported to the grid, resulting in a net impact of between 33 to 35 kilowatts on the electricity network in Dingle during the test. This really shows the potential of this vehicle-to-grid technology and how it could participate in flexibility or energy services into the future. On this slide, there's a lot of information, and again, we're looking at a demand response test, but this time at one of our ambassador homes. So we'll spend a second just to explain what the various elements are before we move on to the test. On the top right, there's a chart that is showing us the power flow on the particular 15 kVA transformer. You'll be able to see a sharp rise in power at around 12:07 when the EV was plugged in and charging started. Just below that is some logging from the commands that are being sent to activate the demand response event. Then we have the power values and flows with the grid and between the different clean energy enabling technologies in the home. And during the recording, I'll highlight the EV, the battery, and the grid supply as the values change on receipt of the demand response instruction. There was little to no activity on the heat pump during this particular test. This test was done on the 3rd of December and is sped up here for the purposes of the webinar. If you watch the EV charger, battery and grid supply values closely, you'll see those values change when they receive and respond to the demand response command. The command was sent at 12:24 and by 12:25 the charging had been suspended and the battery starts to go to full discharge. It outputs almost 2.4 kilowatts with approximately 1.5 kilowatts being exported to the grid. In the chart on the top right, you'll see the sharp drop in power at the transformer, and actually the exported power from the property is enough to meet the needs of the other 5 customers off this transformer and still supply 1.2 kilowatts up onto the distribution network. Over the next 10 minutes, the response is sustained by the ambassador property and the power in the transformer varies due to changing load within the home. At 12:34, the demand response event expires, and by 12:35 we can see the resumption of EV charging and the battery has also stopped discharging as things return to normal again. As in the previous example, this test demonstrates the type of control and demand response that can be achieved from residential properties under the right circumstances. My last slide outlines some of the remaining tests we'll be completing between now and the end of January when the technical trials conclude. There'll be more manual demand response tests run to explore different test durations and with different participating sites. So for example, we might select all sites on a particular feeder or all of those in a particular geographical area. There's also a number of coordinated tests where we'll be advising everyone of the test and ask them to participate by ensuring their electric vehicles are connected at a particular time. This will provide us the best case, maximum impact result, but it's not so realistic. The demand reduction services with EVs only work when an EV is actually connected and charging, or where the EV is connected to the charger in the case of the vehicle grid. There'll be many other tests then that we will run, which will be unannounced, and we'll look at trying to understand and measure the different levels of demand reduction that we get at different times of day and of different days of the week. We'll also continue to analyse the data from the ongoing time-scheduled and price-based demand response scenarios and then make adjustments and rerun the trials as needed. So that's it from me for now. Thank you for listening. We'll pass back to Fergal, who will MC some of the questions.
Thanks again, Kieran. That was a really, really great presentation on flexibility and the trial and everything that was involved in this, the observations, learnings and so forth. Really, really good. Thanks for that. And I suppose for those who don't know, the Dingle project team is very small. At max, it was 5 people, and we're down to 3 people at the moment. And over the last few months, the technical trials have been a huge part of Kieran's life. He's not just his working life, but it's overlapped into his personal time as he checked at night time and over the weekends to see if the tests that were scheduled were running as intended. And I know how delighted he was when the final piece of the technology solution came together. And I think today's webinar really demonstrated everything that was involved in that. So really well done, Kieran. Thanks very much. So I'd now like to invite Mike and Kieran to join myself on the Q&A session. There's lots of really interesting questions starting to come through from the audience. And there was 2 of them, first of all, that I'll deal with that I see. A question came in from Sean O'Callaghan around what barriers were there to securing an energy partner for the peer-to-peer trial that we essentially took out of scope. And just to give you an idea, this, Sean, I suppose one of the challenges was that we tried to seek a partner around the time that there was still a lot of discussion on the microgeneration incentivization scheme. So the timing might have been a big challenge there, that suppliers were unsure about what their obligations might be in that regard. So it was difficult to convince people to work with us on the form of peer-to-peer that we were proposing when there was so much uncertainty around what the obligations on suppliers would be in that whole space anyway. So that partly explained why it was difficult for us to get somebody to work with us on that one. And then there was another question similarly related to that around whether ESB networks could continue the peer-to-peer trial without the supplier involvement, recognising the systems that are already in place. And I suppose just so that people understand, our technical trials will finish at the end of January of next year, but the infrastructure in terms of the technologies which we've rolled out on people's homes and things like that, that will remain. And there will be an opportunity for other trials on the peninsula if somebody wants to engage people across the trial participant the number of trial participants there to actually work on trials in that regard. And perhaps on Friday, Deirdre Devilish is talking about other initiatives that might be planned across the peninsula. Maybe there'll be further initiatives that will kickstart in that space, but it's unlikely to be something that ESB networks will lead in the near future anyway. But of course, we are very interested to understand the learnings from other parties' peer-to-peer trials if they're tested, and other research into that area. So that's just on peer-to-peer. So Mike, you've got a couple of fans out there. Lots of people very interested in your frank and honest feedback, and so well done on that. And I suppose a question that came through from Nolene Campbell was just in regard to the noise levels on the EVs. And do you think the lower noise level causes any sort of a challenge or an issue from a safety or an awareness point of view?
Oh, there is actually a button that you can press inside it. It creates a kind of a whistling noise when you're going above about 10 to 15 kilometers an hour. But a lot of it is like any driving, you know, you have to look around you and just be careful. And because of the cameras in the cars, they will beep to remind you of any obstacle in the way, whether it's a cat, a dog, a human, you name it, it's there. So the technology is there in the cars.
Very good.
Is that okay?
Yeah, no, thanks for that. That's really good. And actually, I know your final comment when we were chatting was around it would have been great if you were able to take power out of your battery and meet your needs there when your supply was interrupted by Storm Barra. And there's been one or two questions on that, and maybe I didn't really answer these correctly, Kieran, in just my few remarks. So just in terms of, again, the question came up there, can domestic batteries or V2G chargers be used in the event of a power outage? So any thoughts yourself there?
At the minute, no. It's a safety condition that no generator or micro generators connected to the electricity network, that it's a condition that it can't it doesn't operate if the electricity supply is off or de-energized. For industrial and larger factory type settings, there are changeover mechanisms and special protection schemes that can be employed, but it's a condition of a micro generator that it must disconnect whenever the grid supply is off or de-energized. Some of the equipment manufacturers manufacture add-ons to some of these systems that are utilized in other parts of Europe or around the world, but not or can't be done here at the moment.
Great, thanks for that. There's been a few questions coming in on V2G then in a general sense. So a question from Pádraig Kerr, and again, Kieran, you might be best positioned to answer this. And I suppose Pádraig wasn't aware that vehicle OEMs were fully on board with the whole concept of V2G, and is wondering whether there's a potential that V2G could interfere with the recharge cycles of batteries and subsequent battery warranty. Like, have you heard any soundings in that regard?
Yeah, I suppose a lot of the manufacturers are exploring V2G and researching it, I suppose, from that perspective, Nissan seem to be one of the leading manufacturers in the V2G space, and I think in Ireland are the only vehicle that is capable of providing vehicle to grid, and they don't seem to have a particular issue with it. In fact, there's studies even ongoing as well to look to see if vehicle to grid could help the batteries by using them more fully, maybe than shorter charges that might be done more frequently. So there's a lot of research and exploration in V2G happening at the moment, and at the moment it's only possible through the CHAdeMO connection. There's a group looking at making that available through the CCS connection, which is maybe more common on a lot of the EVs available today. So it's a space that's continually evolving, and I suppose it's only over time that a lot of these learnings will become available.
Thanks, Kieran. And a question from Robert Kazasiuk, again to yourself, Kieran. In terms of your opinion, how far are we from having commercial V2G installations in Ireland? And what are the top barriers, and are these being actively addressed in terms of anything that you're aware of?
I suppose the top barrier to V2G is the cost. The cost of the units at the moment are, 7, 8, 9 times the price of a regular charger, and especially, I suppose, for a commercial context, a fleet context, vehicle to grid as a concept could work quite well, where vehicles will be in a particular location or depot, within kind of 6 p.m. to 8 a.m. times fairly consistently, and you could maybe understand the level of response and value that they could provide. But at the end of the day, a company's not going to install a large fleet of V2G chargers at the price that they're at the moment. So I'd say that's the biggest barrier presently.
Price, okay, very good. And in a related question, and again, maybe you're probably best positioned to answer this, Kieran, from Philip Gahan, can plug-in hybrid EVs also do V2G?
That I'm not sure of. I think the Mitsubishi Outlander may be capable, but I wouldn't be 100% sure on that, to be honest.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm just scrolling through. There's plenty of questions here. All right. Let me see. A side topic, and probably not something that you mentioned, Kieran, in your presentation, but another aspect of the work of the project was on some modelling work that was carried out. And a question that came in from Priyanko Thakurta was around, and he thanked you for your great presentation, but he was wondering whether a power quality study was conducted as part of the overall proof of concept.
Yeah, so I suppose there was a lot of modelling work done with so some of the modelling team in Marai, in the research wing of UCC, and I suppose that modelling work really looked at the impact of these clean energy enabling technologies on the grid. So how much penetration of EVs, heat pumps and solar PV could be accommodated on the grid. One of the aspects that wasn't really looked at there was in terms of harmonics, but we were looking at, I suppose, voltage dips and voltage rise and things like that in the network as part of that study. I suppose what's not mentioned and will probably be covered in the reliability webinar later this week is around the low voltage monitoring and devices that are installed on the network. And everywhere where we have participating customers on the project, we have installed these devices, and we can see things like harmonics and power quality data from those. So we have the ability to analyze that after the testing's been completed.
Very good. Thanks for that. And I suppose a question here that I can probably answer myself. I'm not sure who asked it, but should a law be introduced for all home EV chargers to be smart, and for the smart functionality to be enabled upon commissioning by the homeowner's electrician, and would that help the grid? And I suppose for anybody who can listen in to Friday's webinar, you'll hear Ellen Diskin talking about the National Networks Local Connections Programme. And I know that programme is certainly looking at and trying to encourage standardisation, that future EV chargers, when they're installed, that at least they're smart and they can be connected to support potential services down the line. So I'm not sure whether it'll be a law, but certainly there's value in having devices that are being installed where they can be smart enabled. So thanks for whoever raised that question. Let me just scroll down through a few more. Now, again, maybe in the similar vein, is there a common smart standard for heat pumps, EV chargers, or solar PV system manufacturers to future-proof them for flexibility? If not, who should be working on this objective? And Kieran, you're probably closer to some of the technologies, having worked with the manufacturers. Do you know whether manufacturers are thinking down that term in terms of standardization of their products?
For the domestic scale products, it's a real challenge that there isn't a standard at the moment. I suppose as you get to larger grid scale batteries and larger solar installations with large inverters and stuff, there are standards that are out there and available for those types of devices that allow control by utilities. But within the domestic setting, a lot of the devices like your chargers don't have a common standard. For example, you have charger standards that allow charge point management systems to be able to control and interface with chargers. There is, I suppose, the most open one probably is the battery systems. A lot of them commonly have Modbus capability, which would be quite common. But for heat pumps and the likes, I suppose the standards in the past would have been how they integrate with built-in automation systems rather than utilities for demand response. But it's a particular area that we spoke a lot about with Mitsubishi, and they helped us in order, I suppose, to be able to achieve the response that we were getting from the heat pumps in our trial. I suppose there's groups like CGRE and IEC technical working groups that are looking at this area, but I'm not aware of any output from that yet where manufacturers are applying these standards across the board.
Very good, thanks for that. And Colin Rochford has an interesting question. It was mentioned that ESB networks typically do not control anything behind the meter. For the grid of the future, will that need to change, and how do you envisage it will work with billing, etc.? So you might have some thoughts on that, Kieran.
Yeah, like at the moment, it's not ESB network's intention to control devices behind the meter. The electricity retailers or suppliers are the people who have the interface or connection with the existing customers, and my own view is that the likes of the suppliers or retailers or some of the aggregation companies who provide services to the transmission system operator currently are likely to be the people who will engage or contract with customers in terms of providing flexibility. For the suppliers, they already bill the customers, and I suppose there's mechanisms there already where they could potentially remunerate customers for the service they provide. Similarly, aggregators do this already for large industrial and commercial units. So I would expect that the people in those areas will advance that further over the next few years.
Great, thanks, Kieran. A question came in from Priyanko Takurta. Was a separate battery installed on site? He thought that the battery mentioned was the battery in the EV. And I don't know whether you were on yesterday's webinar, Priyanko, but we explained and showed all of the technologies that were installed at the 5 Dingle ambassador sites. So the 5 ambassadors, each of them had a residential battery as well installed in the property. The people that have the V2G devices are the V2G chargers. They are not the 5 ambassadors. There are 5 of the 10 EV ambassadors. And originally we switched out we provided them the standard smart charger initially, and then switched them out in October to give them the V2Gs to start testing the V2G capability at that stage. So I hope that clears up that one. Let me just see. There's a couple of other questions that I didn't get to. Let's see. There was a question, and I think I might have asked you, Mike, earlier on, just when we had our chat. What do other people in your family think about the EV? Is it practical to meet all the needs of the family?
It would be, yes. It would be definitely practical needs. We do a lot of driving, but, you would do maybe 2 trips a day. We just say work, and then you might have sport or school or something going on, and you just come home and charge it at night. It would definitely be enough to meet the needs. Like, the only issue I've ever had is when I'm going along on journeys, but I think if you plan them, you can be fine with that.
Very good. And I suppose 2 related questions, and again, just in the week that's in it. So, Mike, has Storm Barra changed your view on electric vehicles and electric motoring?
No, it hasn't changed at all, because I knew it was coming, so I charged up fully just in case I needed the car. But then, with the red warning, you're not supposed to be on the road because your insurance don't cover you. So the car has been parked up the last 2 days. I used it last night to charge up the phones, because I had no power. But other than that, these things have to be done.
Very good, very good. So you're making use of the battery there in some way anyway.
You have to, yeah.
Very good. And actually, just in relation to that, Kieran, you might have some advice for people who drive EVs that in order to minimise their impact of loss of supply interruptions, such as that experienced by Storm Barra, should they charge up every night or every couple of days, or what would be your advice to people?
Yeah, like I suppose it really comes down to how much driving maybe some of the vehicles do. For our particular project, we let everybody charge whatever way they wanted initially to see what way that looked, and people who were doing extensive mileage had to charge every day, whereas those who were doing very little mileage were actually able to charge once a week, as Mike was saying earlier. But then later in our project, we wanted people to, where possible, charge every day, so the charges were shorter in duration. I suppose if you charge every day and you keep your vehicle topped up, you minimize the risk of issues due to power outages or whatever. It's like a fuel shortage. If your car is full of fuel, you're less susceptible to that for a number of days. Like if Mike's able to get away with there for a number of days with the vehicle, generally speaking, power is restored fairly quickly. So yeah, I would be advising people to keep the vehicle topped up, but it really is, sometimes it's not practical, and it really comes down to whatever the person's own needs are.
Very good, very good. And now a kind of a question for both of you that you might be able to provide your own thoughts on. So, Mike, from your perspective, would you have any concerns about a third party, whether it would be, say, ESB Networks or somebody else out there who will be controlling your charger?
The only concern I have, I probably have to read the fine print and see what the story is with likes of Claire and Kieran that I have dealt with along. I would have no trouble dealing with them if they were the guys running the show. You have to see what's involved really first before you sign up to anything, as you know yourself today.
Yeah. And Kieran, in terms of your perceptions for the people that you've been dealing with on the trial, are you getting any kickback in terms of taking control of their devices, whether it's their heat pump, their EV charger, during the trial? What concerns are people sharing with you?
The concerns have really focused around the charger, to be honest. With the heat pump, if the heat pump's off for a couple hours, a lot of the houses that are well insulated, the temperature doesn't drop by more than half a degree if the heat pump was off for a number of hours. Similarly, tank temperature doesn't drop very quickly. So people have had no issues with their heat pump consumption being moved around. Similarly, they've had no issues with the battery being charged or discharged. In line with our trials, I suppose the concern has been around the charger, and where maybe charging hasn't occurred during the night for whatever particular reason, it could leave the person short the following day. So there has been some anxiety in that regard, and is, I suppose, been one of the challenges on the project to date.
Very good. Thanks for that. And I suppose I'm just conscious of time, and I'm wondering, Mike, have you any final words from your end of things before? If you haven't, don't worry.
No, I do. I have no real concerns. The only thing I would think is like the big multinationals have to come on board, large companies, schools, Department of Education, and put the chargers in while people are working during the day. And they can come out in their coffee break or whatever and move it out of the way, and another person can charge. Because if that's the way we're going to go, we need it. Like if you look at a high rise in the middle of Dublin, there is nothing around them. Like I've done my own little surveys. There's nothing around them, no place to park for an EV. I'd say if 20 people in a high rise decide to have electric vehicles, they'd be depending on going someplace in Dublin to find there is nothing available in their home. Like we are lucky living in the country, we can install one in the back of our house and it's there. Things like that would concern me, but the bigger picture.
Yeah. So charging solutions for people that live in apartment complexes and shared premises like that. Very good, very good. Okay, listen, I think we'll wrap up on the Q&A now. I'm just conscious of time, and I suppose for those that are still on the call, tomorrow's webinar will focus on the work carried out under the theme of the active energy citizen, and it'll focus on the activities undertaken to engage and empower our citizens right across the Dingle community on low carbon transformation. So if you can If you're available and you can join Claire McElligott, who's the Community Engagement Manager, and Evan Boyle from MARI, who did a lot of research in this whole space. They'll also be joined with Rory McKeown and Carol Leahy, two of our Dingle project ambassadors, and you get to hear about what their experiences are on the ground. So if you haven't already registered for tomorrow's webinar, you can do so by clicking on the original registration email and navigating to the Thursday webinar session. It'd be great to have you on board. So hopefully you've all taken away something from today's webinar. We've provided lots of information on the EV trial and the flexibility trial, the observations and learnings emerging from these. And you also got to hear Mike share all his own experiences in terms of electric motoring. So once again, many thanks to everybody who gave up their lunch break today and joined today's webinar. And a special thanks to Mike and to Kieran for their great presentations and engagement. So for further information on the Dingle project or any other of ESB Network's innovation initiatives, check out the innovation page on the ESB Network's website. So hopefully some of you will be able to join the webinars during the remainder of the week. In the meantime, goodbye, stay safe. Slán.